They built 21 rental cabins on my land. My land. The HOA president just smirked as bulldozers tore down the trees my late wife and I had planted. She thought she had stolen everything from me, erasing 26 years of my life to build her own little money-making empire. But what she didn't know was that while she was busy building, my own revenge plan was already in motion. Every single rental payment, every dollar she thought she was making, was being secretly redirected, straight into my bank account. Where are you watching this takedown from? Let me know in the comments. And if you believe no homeowner should ever be bullied by a power-hungry HOA, hit that subscribe button, because you need to see the look on her face when she realized she built her entire project for me. It all started with a flash of pink. I was driving my old Ford back up the service road after checking the south fence line, and there it was, flapping against the gray, weathered wood of my main gate. Not just taped, but cinched on with two thick black zip ties, pulled so tight they dug into the timber. Pink. The color of bad news in our community. An HOA violation. I killed the engine and sat there for a long moment, the truck ticking as it cooled. I'd owned this stretch of land for 26 years. The 11 acres of woods, the small pond, the rocky hill my wife Kate used to call Stillwater Hill. It was all mine, bought and paid for long before this sprawling subdivision. The meadows at Stillwater even broke ground. My property was an island bordered by their perfect lawns and identical houses, but never a part of it. I'd made sure of that when they started building. My property lines were clear, recorded, and non-negotiable. I got out, the gravel crunching under my boots, and worked my thumbnail under the plastic to read the notice. It was laminated, of course. Everything from the HOA felt permanent and smug. The text was sharp and official-looking. Violation. Notice illegal trespassing on common land. It claimed I was in breach of community bylaws for maintaining an unauthorized fence on HOA property. It demanded I remove the entire fence line within 7 days, or the association would do it for me and bill my address for the cost. I read it twice. Trespassing. The word felt ridiculous, like a typo. How can a man trespass on his own front yard? This wasn't just my property. It was my life. After Kate died, this land was the only thing that felt like home anymore. Her ashes were buried under the big oak on the hill. She'd love that tree. A cold knot formed in my stomach. This wasn't some mistake about leaving a garbage can out too long. This was something else. I left the pink notice flapping on the gate and walked. I knew my property lines better than I knew the back of my own hand. I'd been a land surveyor for the county for 40 years before I retired. I could walk a boundary line in the dark and not stray an inch. I started at the northeast corner, where my land met the subdivision's manicured greenbelt. And that's when I saw them. New stakes. Not my old faded wooden ones, but bright orange survey stakes, hammered deep into the ground, a good 100 feet inside my property. A thin orange string ran between them, creating a new, false boundary. I followed it, my blood running colder with every step. I saw fresh gravel laid down, forming a crude path, where there had only been pine needles and dirt before. Further in, near the clearing by the pond, I found more. Little colored flags dotted the earth, blue for water, red for power, foundation markings. Someone wasn't just trespassing, they were planning to build. My first stop was the HOA office. It was a sterile, soulless little building tucked behind the community pool, smelling of chlorine and air freshener. Behind a wide desk sat a woman with perfect blonde hair, a crisp white blazer, and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Karen Delaney, the HOA president. She acted like she was the mayor of a small country. A clipboard was positioned neatly in front of her. "Mr. Branson," she said, her voice smooth as polished marble. "To what do we owe the pleasure?" I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I put the pink notice on her desk. "There's a mistake. This notice claims I'm trespassing. That land is mine. Has been for nearly 30 years. I pulled my original deed and the latest county survey from the folder I'd brought. I unfolded the survey map on her desk, the worn creases a testament to its age and authenticity. My 11 acres were outlined in clear, dark ink. "See? Parcel 7B. The Meadows development ends right here." I pointed to the boundary line. Karen barely glanced at it. She pushed it back toward me with a perfectly manicured finger. Per our new master plan, Mr. Branson, that area has been rezoned as part of Phase 3 development. The board voted on it 6 months ago. It's a community enhancement project. She said, community enhancement, like it was a magic spell that made property theft okay. You can't just vote to take someone's land, I said, my voice low and steady, but I could feel the anger starting to simmer. That's not how it works. This deed is legally binding. She gave me that condescending little smirk. It's an old document. Things change. You'll need to take that up with county planning if you have an objection. It was a classic brush-off, a power move designed to make me feel small and buried in bureaucracy. But as she spoke, my eyes drifted to the wall behind her. It was covered in a huge, glossy map of the entire development. The meadows at Stillwater, it read in fancy script. I saw Phase 1, the completed houses. I saw Phase 2, the new section they were clearing, and then I saw it, Phase 3. It was a block of land colored in green, designated for future community cabins. And right in the middle of it, I saw the familiar shape of my parcel, my 11 acres, my home, but the label on it didn't say Branson. It didn't have a parcel number. It was just absorbed, erased, part of their grand design. They hadn't just made a mistake. They had redrawn the world to fit their plans, and I was just a ghost on the map. It felt like a punch to the gut. This wasn't about a fence. It wasn't about a fine. It was erasure. They were pretending my land, my wife's final resting place, never even belonged to me. The fight went out of me, replaced by a cold, heavy dread. I took my papers and walked out without another word. What was there to say? She had her reality, and I had mine, but hers was the one hanging on the wall. I drove home in a daze. When I got to my gate, I heard it. A low, rumbling growl that vibrated through the floor of my truck. It grew louder, closer. I looked up the road, and my heart sank. 2 massive yellow bulldozers were crawling toward my property, their steel blades gleaming in the afternoon sun. They weren't coming to remove my fence. They were coming to start building on my land. They didn't wait. The next morning, the sound of chainsaws woke me before the sun was even up. It was a high, screaming whine that cut through the morning mist and went straight through my soul. I stood at my kitchen window, coffee mug growing cold in my hands, and watched them dismantle my life, piece by piece. They started with the pines Kate and I had planted along the northern edge, the ones that were supposed to be our privacy screen. They fell one after another, crashing to the ground, with a shudder I could feel in the floorboards of my house. The crew was fast, efficient, a swarm of yellow hard hats and orange vests. They worked with a detached professionalism that was somehow worse than malice. To them, it was just another job site, another patch of dirt to be cleared. To me, they were ripping pages out of my memory. By midday, they reached the crest of Stillwater Hill. They reached the oak. It was a magnificent, sprawling tree, older than the county itself. It was where Kate had asked me to spread her ashes. It was our spot. I watched as a man with a saw the size of a small motorcycle circled its trunk. I didn't shout. I didn't run out there. What was the point? They had their papers, their imaginary map. I just stood there and watched until the great tree groaned, leaned, and then collapsed with a final hollow boom that echoed across the valley. A part of me broke with it. The story Karen Delaney was spinning was that the land had been donated to the community years ago by a previous long-gone owner. It was a convenient fiction, a lie told so smoothly that people wanted to believe it. She claimed the new Stillwater Eco Cabins would be a source of revenue, paying for a new community pool and funding neighborhood events. It sounded wonderful if you didn't know the truth. The next board meeting was packed. Word had gotten out about the dispute, and the room was buzzing. I saw neighbors I'd known for years, some looking sympathetic, others just curious, hungry for the drama. Karen sat at the head of a long table with the rest of the board, looking composed and authoritative. I had my documents in a neat stack, the original deed, the county plats, the tax records for the last 26 years, showing I'd paid every cent owed on parcel 7B. When my turn came to speak, I laid it all out, calm and clear. I wasn't emotional, I was factual. I put the map on the overhead projector, showing the undeniable boundary lines. This land is not, and has never been, HOA common area, I stated, my voice steady. It belongs to me. Construction is illegal. Karen listened with a patient, practiced smile, the kind a doctor gives you before delivering bad news. When I finished, she didn't even look at my documents. She just nodded slowly. "Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Branson," she said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. However, the rezoning plan was presented and ratified at the general meeting last March. There was a 60-day window for objections. You missed the objection window. The air went out of the room. It was the perfect bureaucratic checkmate. She wasn't debating the facts. She was dismissing them on a technicality. Before I could respond, she clicked a button and a slick presentation lit up the screen behind her. "Now for the exciting part," she chirped. "The Stillwater Eco Cabins." Photos of charming little A-frame cabins flashed across the screen. Projections of rental income followed. $600 a night, the slide read. Revenue for a new pool, tennis court resurfacing, and community-wide events. I could feel the room shift. Neighbors who had looked at me with concern were now looking at the screen with interest. They saw a new pool. I saw a bulldozer driving over my wife's grave. That's when I lost my composure. "That hill has a name," I said, my voice rising, cracking with a grief I thought I had buried. "My wife called it Stillwater Hill. It was her favorite place on earth. Her ashes are buried under an oak tree that your crew cut down yesterday morning for your revenue project." The room went dead silent. The emotional truth of it hit them harder than any legal document could. For a moment, I saw a flicker of panic in Karen's eyes, but it was gone as quickly as it came. "Your appeal is denied," she said, her voice hard as ice. She banged her gavel. "This matter is closed." When I refused to sit down, when I tried to say more, a large man in a shirt that read HOA Security, a wannabe cop named Lou Parks who loved his little bit of authority, put a hand on my arm. He escorted me out of the room as if I were the criminal. I stood in the hallway, heart hammering against my ribs, the distant sound of applause filtering through the closed doors as Karen likely moved on to a less troublesome topic. Defeated, I turned to leave, but as I passed the side exit, I heard two voices whispering from the shadows of the patio. As they were board members, two of Karen's loyalists. "That was close," one of them muttered. "He almost had them." The other one chuckled, a low, ugly sound. "Doesn't matter. The cabins are already pre-booked solid for the next 3 months. Big payday is coming. We just need to keep him quiet until the money is in the bank. Big payday." The words hung in the air. This wasn't for a community pool. This was for them. It was a planned, deliberate theft. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stood at my fence line, the one they said was illegal, and stared into the darkness of my own property. It wasn't dark anymore. It was lit up by massive construction floodlights, casting long, eerie shadows. The ground was torn up, a raw wound in the earth. And in the center of it all, where the great oak once stood, was nothing but a stump and the beginnings of a concrete foundation. They had broken my heart. And in doing so, they had given me a reason to fight back with everything I had. The anger from that meeting burned off fast. Anger is a hot fire. It consumes fuel, and then it's gone. What was left was cold, heavy, and dense, like a block of iron in my gut. It was a different kind of fuel. It was resolve. Grief makes you a spectator in your own life. This was different. This made me a planner. I spent the next week watching them. I didn't protest or yell. I documented. I took out my old field binoculars and a notepad. And I sat on my porch from sunrise to sunset, tracking their every move. They were fast, too fast. The foundations for 3 cabins were poured in a single day. The next morning, flatbed trucks arrived, each carrying the walls of a cabin, pre-built with windows already in place. They were like giant model kits. A crane would lift a wall, men would guide it into place, and by lunch, a new structure would be standing where there was only dirt that morning. There were no county inspection trucks, no visits from a building inspector to check the rebar in the concrete or the framing of the walls. I knew the codes. I'd worked with those guys for decades. They're meticulous. They don't miss steps. But here, they were completely absent. Something was deeply wrong. My binoculars could only show me so much. I needed a better view. A few years back, my son had bought me a drone for my birthday, a fancy one with a high-resolution camera. I had mostly used it to check on cattle in the back pasture, but now it had a new purpose. I charged the batteries and sent it up. The view it gave me was devastating. From 100 feet in the air, the construction site was a raw red scar gouged into the green landscape. It was one thing to see the destruction from the ground. It was another to see it from that high up, a perfect picture of the violation. I flew the drone in slow, methodical patterns, just like I used to walk survey lines. I filmed the crews working, the materials they used, the lack of safety measures. I documented the foundations, the plumbing, trenches, the electrical lines being laid. I saved every minute of footage, labeling each file by date and time. It was my evidence, my silent testimony. I decided to try a different approach. I took a few screenshots from the drone footage, clear shots showing the hasty work and the scale of the project, and I posted them on the official Meadows at Stillwater community Facebook group. I kept my posts simple and calm. Can anyone tell me if proper permits were pulled for this large-scale commercial project? I'm concerned about the lack of county inspections. Is this even legal? I asked. For about an hour, the post gained traction. People were confused. They asked questions. A few expressed concern. Then, suddenly, it was gone. Vanished. I refreshed the page, thinking it was a glitch. Nothing. I tried to post again, but a new message popped up. You have been banned from this group. Karen wasn't just controlling the land. She was controlling the information. She was building a wall of silence around her project. The digital ban was a small thing, but it told me everything. She was scared. People who follow the rules don't silence questions. A couple of days later, I was at the Greasy Spoon, the local diner where you can get breakfast at any time of day, and the coffee is always hot. I was nursing a cup and reading the paper when a young man in work boots and a plumbing company t-shirt sat down in the booth behind me. I recognized him from the construction site. He was talking to the waitress, a woman he clearly knew. "Tired, Gabe?" she asked. "Exhausted," he replied, letting out a heavy sigh. That cabin job is a nightmare. The foreman is pushing us to cut corners everywhere, wants the septic lines run by Friday, but it's all wrong. My ears perked up. I stayed perfectly still, pretending to read my paper. "What's wrong with it?" the waitress asked. "They've got us running the main drain field over a dry creek bed," he said, his voice a low grumble. Told him it's against every code in the book. He just said, "The boss wants it done fast, not perfect." The whole job is rigged, I tell you. It'll all pass a visual check, but one big rainstorm and this whole place is going to smell like a sewer. That was it. That was the piece I was missing. It wasn't just a land grab, it was a shoddy, dangerous one. I paid for my coffee and left, my mind racing. Gabe, a veteran like me, judging by the patch on his jacket. He was a good kid, caught in a bad situation. When I got home, I didn't stop. I pulled out all my old plat maps, the original topographical surveys of the entire area before the development was built. I spread them out across my dining room table, a mosaic of lines and elevations. I cross-referenced them with the drone footage I'd taken, mapping out every foundation, every trench, every utility line they had installed. It was a long, painstaking process that took me late into the night. Then I went online to the county's public records portal. I started searching for the construction permits. I searched under the HOA's name. Nothing. I searched under the developer's name. Nothing. It made no sense. You couldn't build a garden shed without a permit, let alone 21 commercial cabins. I was about to give up when a stray thought hit me. I searched for the project name itself, Stillwater, and there it was, a single comprehensive permit covering the entire build. But it wasn't pulled by the HOA. It was filed under a corporate name I'd never heard before, Stillwater Holdings, LLC. A little more digging, a 5-minute search on the state's business registry gave me the answer. The registered agent for Stillwater Holdings, LLC, was Daniel Delaney, Karen Delaney's husband. A wave of cold clarity washed over me. This wasn't a community project. This wasn't incompetence or a bureaucratic mistake. This was a premeditated scheme, a deliberate and calculated theft, hidden behind a shell corporation named after the hill they had stolen from me. She wasn't just a bully, she was a thief. And as I sat there in the quiet of my house, the solution came to me. It was a plan born of my 40 years of knowing how the system really works. The paper trails and the legal lines that are invisible to most people. They thought they could erase me from the map. They had no idea I was the one who helped draw the maps in the first place. I wasn't just going to stop them. I was going to own them. I spent a career untangling knots like this. For 40 years, my job as a county land assessor and boundary dispute consultant was to find the truth buried under decades of bad paperwork, handshake deals, and faded ink. I knew the county records office better than I knew my own living room. I knew its quirks, its forgotten archives, and its long history of clerical errors. People like Karen Delaney see land as a picture on a glossy map. I see it as a stack of paper, a chain of title stretching back 100 years. The prettiest map in the world doesn't mean a thing if the paperwork beneath it is flawed. And I had a strong hunch that hers was very flawed. My first call was to my old friend Ed Tully. We'd served together in the Army Corps of Engineers before he went to law school and became the sharpest titled attorney in the state. He was retired now, mostly spending his days fishing, but his mind was still a steel trap. "Ed," I said when he picked up, "I need you to look at a plat redraw from about 15 years ago, Stillwater Creek area." I didn't have to say more. He knew what that meant. "Let me guess," he grumbled. "Somebody's trying to build on land that ain't theirs." The next day, I was sitting in Ed's dusty home office, surrounded by stacks of books and the faint smell of old paper. We pulled up the digital parcel records on his computer. We went back, year by year, through every change, every sale, every survey in this corner of the county. And then, at 2 in the afternoon, fueled by lukewarm coffee and grim determination, we found it. It was exactly what I had suspected. 15 years ago, when the Meadows at Stillwater development was first being planned, the county digitized all their old paper maps. During that process, a mapping overlay error had occurred. A single keystroke, a misplaced click of a mouse. Someone had misaligned the digital layers. My 11-acre parcel, an independent property, was accidentally grouped under a future development easement for the new subdivision. It was a simple clerical screw-up, but it was the seed from which Karen's entire scheme had grown. She or her husband must have stumbled upon this error, saw an unassigned parcel on the plan, and decided it was a gift from heaven. But here was the beautiful critical detail, the part they either didn't know or didn't care enough to check. The mapping error was just that, a mapping error. The actual legal documents were never changed. The original title to my land, the one I held in my hand, was never severed. The mineral rights were never transferred. The chain of ownership was unbroken. On paper, where it truly mattered, my ownership was absolute and undisputed. The map on Karen's wall was a fantasy. "Well, I'll be," Ed said, leaning back in his chair with a slow grin spreading across his face. "She built a castle on a cloud." He had lost his own family farm in a zoning fight decades ago, so I knew this was personal for him. He was enjoying this. "So, what's the plan, Jack?" he asked. "You want to file an injunction? Sue them?" I shook my head. "No," I said quietly. "An injunction stops the work. A lawsuit takes years. They'll bury me in legal fees. I want something better. I want poetic justice." Ed's grin widened. He knew exactly what I was thinking. We spent the rest of the afternoon drafting the paperwork. It was a simple, elegant move. We filed a corrective deed notice with the county, a document that officially pointed out the 15-year-old clerical error and reaffirmed my clear title. Then, we quietly refiled the corrected deed under a new entity I had Ed create that morning, the Stillwater Trust. I named it in honor of my wife, Kate. The land was legally her legacy now. The beauty of it was its silence. It wasn't a lawsuit. It wouldn't trigger any alarms in Karen's office. It was just a quiet administrative correction in the county's back files. They were building their dream on my land, and now my wife's name was officially and invisibly attached to it. Phase 2 of the plan involved the money. They were already advertising the cabins online, using a slick third-party booking platform called Cabinway. I found the listings easily. "Luxury eco cabins at Stillwater," the headline read, with photos of the one model home they'd finished. I went through the booking process, right up to the payment screen. I saw the payment processor they were using, a standard, well-known online company. Their system, like all systems, was built on verification. The money had to go to the verified owner of the business. That evening, I drafted an email to the payment processor's legal compliance department. I kept it formal and dry. "To whom it may concern," I wrote. "This letter serves as formal notice of an ownership dispute regarding the property known as Stillwater Cabins, currently managed by Stillwater Holdings, LLC. Due to ongoing litigation and a corrected deed filing, all payments and future revenues from these properties must be redirected to the verified landowner's trust. I attached everything: a notarized copy of my original deed, the newly filed corrective deed under the Stillwater Trust, the county parcel map showing the error, and proof of the permit mismatch. I sent it off and waited. For 3 days, nothing happened. The construction continued. They were putting roofs on the 4th and 5th cabins. Then, on a Thursday afternoon, I got a quiet, one-sentence email from the payment processor. This is to confirm that the payout destination for all bookings associated with the Stillwater Cabins property has been updated as per the legal documentation provided. Thank you. That was it. No fanfare, no drama, just a silent digital lever being pulled. The flow of money had been diverted. The cabins were still Karen's project in her mind, but the revenue, every single dollar from every booking, was now flowing quietly into the Stillwater Trust, into my bank account. I didn't say a word to anyone. I just sat on my porch and watched them work, hammering nails and running wires for a project they thought was theirs. 2 weeks later, at a Saturday afternoon HOA wine mixer on the community green, I overheard Karen Delaney bragging to a circle of her friends. "It's just amazing," she said, holding her wine glass aloft. "The cabins have only been open for 1 week, and we've already cleared over $8,000. She was beaming, soaking in the applause. She looked powerful, triumphant. She had no idea she hadn't seen a single dime. 6 weeks. That's how long the money had been flowing into the Stillwater Trust. My bank account was growing steadily, a quiet testament to the trap I had laid. Meanwhile, construction on the cabins was nearly complete. They were hammering the final trim on the last few units, and online bookings were pouring in. Karen, completely oblivious, decided it was time for a victory lap. She called a special HOA meeting with a single item on the agenda: cabin project revenue update. It was her moment to shine, to justify the chaos and prove to everyone what a brilliant visionary she was. The community center was buzzing. She'd promised big news, and the room was full of homeowners eager to hear how much money their new pool fund had made. I found a seat in the back, my folder of documents resting on my lap. Earlier that day, I'd sent an email to the board, formally requesting 2 minutes on the agenda to discuss a property matter. I received a one-line reply from Karen's account: "The agenda is full. Request denied." It was exactly what I expected. Karen stood at the podium, beaming under the fluorescent lights. She was in her element, dressed in a sharp power suit, clicking through a PowerPoint presentation filled with cheerful charts and exclamation points. "As you all know," she began, her voice full of theatrical pride, "we embarked on an ambitious project to enhance our community and create a self-sustaining revenue stream. And I am thrilled to report that the Stillwater Eco Cabins are an unprecedented success." A polite smattering of applause went through the room. She clicked to the next slide, a bar chart meant to show incoming revenue. But the bars were missing. The slide was awkwardly blank. A flicker of confusion crossed her face, but she recovered quickly. "We're just waiting for the final numbers to be compiled by our treasurer, Arthur, who will give us the exciting details." She gestured to a meek, balding man named Arthur, who was sitting at the end of the board table, shuffling a stack of papers with trembling hands. Arthur stood up slowly. He adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat, avoiding eye contact with everyone, especially Karen. "Yes, well," he began, his voice barely a whisper. "About the revenue, there seems to be an issue." Karen's smile tightened. "An issue, Arthur? A reporting delay, you mean?" Arthur swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "No, not exactly a delay. The issue is, there is no revenue." A confused murmur rippled through the audience. Karen's face went pale under her makeup. "That's absurd," she snapped, her voice losing its polished edge. "I saw the booking reports myself. We've been at 90% capacity for 6 weeks. Arthur looked down at his papers as if they might save him. "The bookings are there, yes," he stammered. "But we haven't received any payments from the booking platform. Not a single deposit has been made into the HOA's account." Karen was losing control. She turned on him. "Did you call them? Did you call Stripe? It's probably a glitch in their system." Then she turned to the audience, forcing a brittle smile. "Just a minor technical hiccup, everyone. It's the summer travel season, things get backlogged. But the seed of doubt had been planted. People were whispering, frowning. The air in the room had shifted from excitement to suspicion. That was my cue. I stood up from my seat in the back of the room. I didn't shout. I didn't raise my voice. I just stood there, and the room gradually fell silent. Every eye turned to me. Karen glared at me, her face a mask of fury. "You are out of order, Mr. Branson," she hissed. "I denied your request to speak." I spoke into the silence, my voice calm and clear, letting each word land with its full weight. "It's not a technical glitch, Karen. The payments haven't come because the money is going to the rightful owner." The silence in the room was now absolute. You could have heard a pin drop. "And that's me," I continued. "It's because I own the land, and the cabins, and the name." The collective gasp was audible. I walked slowly to the front of the room, opened my folder, and placed a document on the overhead projector. It was the original survey map. "This is the original plat," I said, pointing with a pen, showing my 11 acres, parcel 7B, clear and undisputed. Click. I replaced it with the next document. "This is the corrected deed, filed with the county 6 weeks ago, fixing a 15-year-old clerical error and reaffirming my ownership under the Stillwater Trust, named for my late wife." Click. The next page went up. It was the State Business Registry lookup for Stillwater Holdings, LLC. "This," I said, my pen circling the name of the registered agent, "shows that the permit for this entire project was pulled by a shell company owned by your husband, Karen, not the HOA." The murmurs in the room were growing louder, angrier. Click. I put up the email confirmation from the payment processor. "And this is the notification confirming that all rental payments have been redirected to the legally verified landowner." I saved the last piece for the screen on the wall, the one she'd used for her smug presentation. I plugged a small flash drive into the laptop. A moment later, the screen lit up not with charts, but with high-definition video. It was the drone footage. The room watched in stunned silence as the camera flew over the torn-up earth, showing the raw foundations, the shoddy septic trenches, and finally, it zoomed in on the first foundation poured, right over the freshly cut stump of the great oak tree, right over my wife's memorial. A woman in the front row gasped and put a hand over her mouth. A man shouted, "Is that true? Did you do that?" The room exploded. It was chaos. Neighbors were on their feet, yelling, pointing at the board. The anger that had been simmering under the surface of this community for years, the frustration with the fines, the rules, the arrogance, it all came boiling up at once. Karen stood at the podium, white as a sheet, stammering, "This meeting is adjourned. I adjourn this meeting." But no one was listening. As she tried to gather her things and flee, a man in the back of the room stood up. He was a retired lawyer who lived down the street. "I'd advise against that, Ms. Delaney," he said, his voice cutting through the noise like a judge's gavel. "What Mr. Branson has presented isn't just an HOA dispute. This just became criminal." That was it. Karen shoved past her own board members and practically ran out of the room, not even stopping to close the door behind her. And as she fled, a new sound began to fill the space she left behind. It started with one person, then 2, then 10, until the whole room was chanting, their voices unified in a single powerful demand. "Resign! Resign! Resign!" I thought the public humiliation would be the end of it. I figured Karen would crawl into a hole, resign, and try to disappear. I underestimated her. Cornered animals don't give up. They get desperate. Instead of accepting defeat, she doubled down. She went into full damage control mode, sending out a frantic typo-riddled email to the entire community, claiming there had been a gross misunderstanding fueled by my disruptive and unsubstantiated claims. She portrayed herself as the victim of a smear campaign. It was a bold move, but the tide had already turned. The story of what happened at that meeting spread like wildfire. People were talking over fences, in the grocery store aisle, at the community pool she so desperately wanted to upgrade with my money. She had lost the room, and now she was losing the neighborhood. A couple of nights later, my dog started barking around 2 a.m. It was a low, insistent growl he reserved for things that were out of place. I got out of bed and looked out the window that faced Stillwater Hill. The construction site was dark, but a small pinprick of light was moving around near where the first cabin had been built. A flashlight, I grabbed my heavy mag light and went out the back door, staying in the shadows of the tree line. As I got closer, I could see who it was. Karen. She was dressed in dark clothing, frantically trying to pry open the door of the site's temporary office trailer with a crowbar. It was a pathetic sight. She was trying to destroy the evidence, to get her hands on the files, the contracts, anything that tied her and her husband's LLC to the sham. But the trailer door was locked up tight. Frustrated, she gave up and started yanking the orange survey stakes out of the ground, tossing them into the woods as if removing them would erase the boundaries I had re-established. What she didn't know was that my next-door neighbor, a quiet IT guy named Mark, had installed a new night vision security camera system a few weeks back after someone's garden gnomes went missing. His main camera had a perfect, unobstructed view of the entire hillside. The next morning, he was at my door with a thumb drive in his hand and a grim look on his face. "I think you need to see this, Jack," he said. The footage was crystal clear. It showed Karen's car pulling up, her failed break-in attempt, her pulling up the survey markers, everything. It was undeniable. I thanked Mark, took the drive, and headed straight to the sheriff's office. This was no longer just a civil matter about land. This was trespassing, attempted breaking and entering, and tampering with evidence. The deputy on duty, a young woman with a no-nonsense expression, watched the entire video without saying a word. When it was over, she looked at me and said, "Sir, we'll take it from here." The fallout was swift. The sheriff's office filing a formal report was like pouring gasoline on the fire. A reporter from the local news station, who had probably been tipped off by someone at the meeting, got wind of the story. The headline on the evening news was brutal. HOA president investigated for squatting on local veterans' land. They showed an aerial shot of the cabins, then cut to a picture of me in my old Army uniform that they must have dug up from somewhere. They contrasted that with the blurry night vision footage of Karen trying to jimmy a lock with a crowbar. Her husband gave a short, panicked statement on their doorstep, saying it was a private matter being handled internally, which only made them look guiltier. Karen tried to claim it was all a misunderstanding, that she was just inspecting the property for safety issues, but no one was buying it. The image of her out there in the dark, yanking up stakes, was too powerful. That news report was the final nail in her coffin. The HOA board, including the two members I'd overheard whispering about their big payday, suddenly found their conscience. They were terrified of being implicated in the fraud and criminal charges. They called an emergency vote, held in the same room where Karen had been humiliated just a week earlier. This time, I didn't have to attend. A neighbor texted me the result 2 minutes after the vote was counted. Unanimous. She's been removed from the board, effective immediately. While the board was busy saving their own skins, the city's chief building inspector, finally alerted to the mess, arrived on site. He wasn't there for a courtesy visit. He had a clipboard and a scowl, and he spent the entire day walking through each and every one of the 21 cabins. I watched from my porch as he went in and out, shaking his head more and more with each inspection. Gabe, the plumber, had been right. The inspector's final report was a masterpiece of code violations. 14 major infractions in total, from improper septic drainage and faulty wiring to foundations that didn't meet seismic standards. He slapped a bright red stop work order on the site office and declared every single cabin unfit for occupancy. The project wasn't just in limbo, it was condemned. A few days later, a small delegation of my neighbors, the new interim HOA board, showed up at my gate. They looked tired and embarrassed. It was the retired lawyer who had spoken up at the meeting, who acted as their spokesman. "Jack," he said, looking me straight in the eye, "on behalf of the community, we are truly sorry for what you've been through. Karen ran this board like her own personal kingdom, and we let her. Now, we have this mess." He gestured up the hill at the silent, empty cabins. "We don't know what to do. The HOA is broke, the project is a disaster, and legally, it's all sitting on your land. What do we do now?" They were looking at me not as an enemy, but as a leader. They were beaten, and they were asking for my help. I looked up at the hill, at the ugly, half-finished buildings scarring the landscape where my wife's favorite tree used to stand. But then, I looked past them, at the view of the valley. Beyond, the same view Kate had loved so much. And I smiled. "We start over," I said. "The right way." Starting over wasn't about tearing things down, it was about building things right. The first thing I did was bring in a real crew, not the corner cutters Karen had hired. Gabe, the plumber who'd spoken up at the diner, was my first call. I put him in charge of fixing the mess, and he brought in honest, skilled tradesmen he knew and trusted. Word got around. On the first Saturday, a half dozen of my neighbors showed up with shovels and work gloves. Mark, the IT guy with the security camera, spent all weekend helping run new electrical conduits. The retired lawyer was there too, hauling away scrap wood. Nobody asked them to come. They just showed up. It wasn't an HOA project anymore. It was a community one. Our first job was healing the land itself. We didn't bulldoze anything. Instead, we worked with the landscape. We replanted trees, dozens of them, focusing on native species that would thrive. The day a nursery truck delivered a beautiful, 10-foot-tall young oak, everyone stopped what they were doing. We all worked together to plant it on the crest of the hill, right where the old one had stood. It was a small tree, but it felt like a giant victory. The cabins were a bigger problem. The city inspector had condemned 9 of them outright. The foundations were cracked and the framing was warped. They were unsalvageable. We took them down, piece by piece, recycling what we could. But 12 of them, the ones built last, were structurally sound. They were shoddily finished, but their bones were good. My neighbors expected me to rent them out at the high prices Karen had planned, to recoup my legal fees and my pain. I had a different idea. I'd seen too many of my fellow veterans come home and struggle, unable to find affordable housing, or just needing a quiet place to get their feet back on the ground. I had the land, I had the money Karen had unknowingly provided, and now I had 12 small, empty houses. The solution was obvious. I set up the Stillwater Trust, not just as a holding company, but as a non-profit. The cabins would be for veterans and first responders, rented out at cost. A quiet, safe place for them to stay with their families while they transitioned, healed, or just took a needed break. It wasn't a business, it was a mission. As we worked to rebuild, the legal system was slowly grinding away at Karen and her husband. They were facing a mountain of charges: fraud, embezzlement, trespassing, and a dozen others. The news that they were using a shell company to funnel HOA funds for a project built on stolen land had turned them into local pariahs. They tried to sell their big, immaculate house in the meadows, but no one would even look at it. The community boycotted them completely. The other board members who had been complicit were voted out in a special election, and the new board, led by the retired lawyer, began rewriting the HOA's bylaws from scratch. Rule number 1, all land boundaries are to be respected, period. No construction could ever begin again without triple verified surveys and a full, signed-off confirmation from the legal property owner. They were putting the power back where it belonged, with the homeowners. One cool autumn afternoon, a few months after it all began, Mark's teenage son, a quiet kid who was good with his hands, came up the hill. He was carrying a piece of wood he'd been carving. He'd burned letters into the smooth, polished surface of a plank of oak salvaged from one of the dismantled cabins. I helped him hang it from a post near the entrance to the cabins. It read, "Stillwater Hill Cabins, welcome home." Looking at that sign, I realized the irony of it all. This project, this little community on the hill, was exactly the kind of thing Kate would have loved. She was always taking people in, always believed in giving back. It was a dream she'd had that I never knew how to build. Karen, in her greed and arrogance, had laid the foundations, cleared the land, and even funded the first stages of its construction. She thought she was building a monument to her own power, but all she really did was clear the path for me to build a monument to my wife's memory. She thought she could take everything from me. In the end, all she did was build my dream for me.